Invincible Season 2 is okay, and if you enjoyed Season 1, then you should definitely check it out before continuing with this video, because we will need to go into detail about Season 2 in order to explain why it doesn't match up to the first.
Let me break it down for you, Mark.
You are gay.
After multiple rewatches of Season 1, I was sure it would be a one-off. It was a positively inspired take on a formula that's been explored and rehashed to death by now, introducing a shocking and monstrous dimension to what, at first, seemed to be a straightforward superhero show, complemented by robust side characters whose roles in the bigger picture felt just as important as our protagonists. Everything from the voice acting to the world building and the balance of lighthearted meta references with disastrous plot developments made Invincible an absolutely singular story. And, in some regards, Season 2 follows suit. The writers do a good job of juggling the endearing and simple fun of having superpowers exist with the significance of living in a world where not everyone uses them for good. Just as our hero, Mark Grayson, must balance his noble-mindedness with the uncomfortable truth that he's descended from a race of alien tyrants. Following the devastation caused by Omni-Man's battle with Invincible in Chicago, among other places, Mark is reeling from the fallout, emotionally more so than physically.
I can't believe you can grow new teeth.
He feels immense guilt not only for having been powerless to prevent Omni-Man's atrocities, but also because he fears that he could turn out just as bad.
I'm not my dad. I'm not my dad!
Mark was arguably one of the weaker characters in Season 1, which isn't saying much. Invincible is a wonderful showcase of strong character writing. But now, he's truly come into his own, when outmatched by a Viltrumite demanding he surrender to the Empire and ordered by Cecil to acquiesce, he stands defiant. Mark's physical capabilities are still well beneath Viltrumite standards, but if Season 1's climax wasn't evidence enough, Season 2 proves his spirit is what's truly invincible. Even after everything that happened with his father, he still holds back in combat and still longs for a deeper connection with his girlfriend. Two facets of his character this season will challenge with praiseworthy results. Nolan's actions had such far-reaching effects that Debbie is unable to find solidarity with the widows and widowers of other superheroes because they hate Omni-Man too much. She was lied to for 20 years and cast aside in an appalling instant. Yet even with him off the planet, Debbie cannot escape the wake of the destruction Nolan caused. But for all the heartache she's endured, when push comes to shove, she's still the resilient and unwavering matriarch Season 1 established. While being menaced by a deranged interdimensional traveler, she does not cower or succumb to his intimidation tactics. After she learns what her family is responsible for in most other dimensions, all the pain and suffering caused by other versions of Nolan and Mark, condoned by other versions of her, she immediately cuts down the villain's logic.
Your family's legacy is blood.
No, not me. I raised the boy who defied his father and saved this planet.
You sure about that?
You make it sound like this is the one world where Mark is good, and you're the one who's bad.
What?
Oh, that's why you're so angry. Because you turned out rotten here, and Mark is the hero for once.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
Eve's story is highly refreshing. I was worried when she began her journey of self-discovery because, for all Invincible's admirable twists on familiar ideas, it still had Amber. There was a possibility for Eve to become a smug, self-centered power freak, flaunting her abilities all over the world to boost her ego, but thankfully, Season 2 went the exact opposite route. Here, Eve had to learn the hard way that for all her power, she could easily do more harm than good. Maybe the most shocking twist this season was the redemption of Eve's dad. Before, he was the second worst character in the show, existing purely to push Eve out of the house and into her Eat, Pray, Love arc. We just didn't see enough of him before. All of his 2 minutes of screen time made him out to be an overbearing, unsympathetic lout. The main problem being, not how crotchety he was, but how flat he was. Season 2 totally flips the script, turning him into one of my favorite characters and an integral part of Eve's character growth. He is ill-tempered and unnecessarily harsh, I won't deny that. But he's also struggling to make ends meet while refusing to take shortcuts or handouts. That fervent and stubborn pride is what makes him interesting and what gives Eve the reality check she needed.
What the hell do you think you're doing? You scared the piss out of my entire crew.
I'm just trying to help.
How do I know that's the code?
The whole lot was unstable. That's why the city never built there. It's a miracle nobody was killed.
Your powers don't make you a hero. They make you dangerous.
He's not the only one who got the treatment, though. Season 2 gives the spotlight to some of the characters who needed it most, and the results speak for themselves. Donald isn't just a self-sacrificing badass, but a tortured soul who accepts his role in the GDA's bigger picture. I never thought I would come around to liking Rex, but Season 2 grounds his juvenile snark, dialing down the douchebaggery and dialing up the humanity.
Turns out Rex really likes home decorating magazines. I think it's because he's never really had a home.
The world of Invincible continues to expand, introducing us to the coalition of planets on Telescria, Midnight City, and Atlantis. All places more interesting than any of the other dimensions, fight me. The scene at Comic-Con poking fun and lazy animation was a welcomed one. It's good that it didn't feel self-deprecating or as though it was expressing bitterness towards fans. It was just the right amount of fourth-wall breaking fun. But as tasteful as it was, I'm sure there will still be those who can't see beneath the surface to how much effort goes into animations like these and others from around the world. And then there are the fun callbacks to Season 1. Another daring escape from the Martians, another bunch of cultish archaeologists locked in the tomb with a cursed pharaoh, and 5 instances of baiting the title card just in the first episode.
When was the last time you went out and
Absolutely not.
Invincible.
Season 2 could very easily have fallen into sequelitis territory, but these callbacks are much more so tips of the hat to the fans than the substance of this season's plot. As intense as this show gets, it's not so edgy that it's forgotten how to have fun, and hopefully Season 3 keeps up the balancing act. I got all sorts of comments on my last Invincible video. Thank you for those, by the way. You truly don't know how much your slander means to me. A good deal of which were people suggesting that Amber was supposed to be a fire-breathing bitch in order to reinforce the motif of Mark persevering no matter how hard he gets beaten down, or even that Amber is a realistically abusive partner, with which they allege to have first-hand experience. Much like cystic fibrosis, the problem with Amber is multifaceted. She's such a cultured and fashionable activist that I don't believe the writers would deliberately cast her as a negative force in Mark's life. But the fact that she only took an interest in Mark after she saw him with Eve, blackmailed Todd, lied about knowing Mark's secret, berated him for doing the right thing during the college attack, tried to cheat on him that same night, belittled him when he finally revealed his identity to her, and offered him a second chance after seeing the soul-shattering ordeal he went through, makes her irredeemable in any sane viewer's eyes. There is no coming back from that, no goodwill left in the audience's reserves. And what makes it worse is how solid the rest of the season was. A showcase of careful character work, meaningful escalation of stakes, and superb voice acting, interspersed with scenes of Amber gleefully crushing Mark's balls. I am not exaggerating when I say bleaching Season 1 of her presence would leave you with a superior product. Some commenters like to point out that Robert Kirkman himself wrote Amber that way. Now, if that's true, she's still a bad character. Good writers can make mistakes, and if it was on his own initiative to turn this into this, then he has most certainly learned his lesson because Amber is given special attention to make her come off as sympathetic and level-headed in Season 2. There is no undoing the horror that is Season 1 Amber, but the way they course-corrected here was perfect.
Who am I to be upset or sad or feel anything when you're literally saving the world, when you disappear for months at a time?
She has aspirations of her own, and when she and Mark can no longer deny how severely their lifestyles diverge, they break up. In a monologue that is both heartfelt and deeply satisfying to everyone who criticized her reasoning in Season 1, she confesses that being with Mark is simply too much. Just by the way, the fact that Mark revealed his secret identity to Amber and only a few months later they broke up because of the role he plays in the Viltrumite conflict reinforces the idea that he never should have told her his secret in the first place. Yes, it was unfair of Mark to keep her in the dark and neglect her for months, but at the end of the day, he does have more important things to do, and now the show has acknowledged that. Hell, if they had split up sooner, Mark could have maintained his secret identity. Their entire relationship thus far serves as a lesson, firstly, to Mark to be more careful with the humans he allows to get close to him, and secondly, to the writers to be more careful with how exactly they want Mark to suffer. Because this?
I know you're a superhero.
You know?
I'm not an idiot. I figured it out weeks ago.
Was a mistake, and we all know it. Now let's address the bug sex in the room. The first time we saw this scene, I think we all had the same reaction.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
But, upon closer analysis, Omni-Man's new perspective on those infinitely more fragile than him is well informed and in keeping with his abandoning his post after the fight with Mark. Before the Viltrumites show up on Thraxa, Nolan is genuinely trying to convince Mark that he now understands the value of the lives of lesser beings, but he doesn't know how to put it into words. Viltrumites aren't conditioned to care, and that conflict causes Nolan immense distress.
You don't understand! I'm not supposed to feel this way! How is this better?
This is how you should have felt on Earth.
It was perfect.
His time among humans instilled compassion in him, whether he likes it or not. After leaving Earth, he wandered aimlessly through space, lost and alone. The gravity of his crimes against innocent strangers as well as his own family led him to spiral into self-doubt and nihilism. It was only when he was given the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of another group of strangers, vastly weaker than him or humans, that the lesson got through to him. In the act of saving those Thraxans from the black hole, and in starting a family with one of them, Nolan learned just how meaningful even their lives can be. And they only live for 1 human year. If he could grow attached to and care for a species whose lifetimes are over in the blink of an eye for him, then he must confront the reality that he truly did love Debbie and Mark.
I think I miss my wife.
With that out of the way, it's time to bring out the Kevin Spacey cutaways. Season 1 wasn't perfect, but it didn't have nearly the amount of conveniences and plot-mandated buffoonery that Season 2 does. Take, for example, everything that happens in space.
The TV ratings for the launch are the highest in 10 years.
Yay! And how's this spacecraft doing?
I don't know. All this equipment is just used to measure TV ratings.
Alan the alien has just now arrived back on Telescria, meaning that his trip from Earth took anywhere between 5 and 8 weeks, since we're in episode 3 at the time of his return. The time it takes these characters to travel intergalactic distances is beyond inconsistent, but suffice it to say that they might as well be flying cosmic concords. Alan delivers the news of a possible Viltrumite ally in their ongoing war against the Viltrum Empire to Thetamus Prime, who's also secretly a Viltrumite. And I don't care how strong they are, ripping that much hair off your face at once would not look like that. That news must have in some way been leaked because barely a space day later the Viltrumites confront Alan for more information on Mark and Nolan, but he doesn't snitch. How the Viltrumites are so good at navigating deep space remains a mystery, but what's more important is how small it all seems here. How easily they track and find their targets when they ostensibly shouldn't be able to. When Alan is on his way back from Earth with the information from Nolan's books in tow, the very same Viltrumite ship currently carrying General Krieg and Anissa passes him by. Alan's imprisonment not only, conveniently, gets him closer to Nolan, but is also one example, among many, of this story's believability suffering because the writers are rushing.
Oh my God! Remember me? Yes. Why are you here? For you, man! I'm here for you!
Back to episode 3, Nolan's inviting Mark to Thraxa is just as hasty on the writer's parts. He pleads with Mark to help the Thraxans because he fears the Viltrumites are hot on his heels, which is right around the same time that the Viltrumites learned he abandoned his post. Nolan was roaming deep space for an indefinite amount of time, while Alan was going straight from Earth to Telescria, and yet all the events line up, conveniently, such that the Viltrumites attack immediately after Mark arrives on Thraxa. Although the Thraxans offered both Mark and Nolan meaningful character development when they interacted with one another, how we got there was extremely out of character for Mark. The writers were obviously cramming all this in to get us to the mid-season showdown with the Viltrumites, and you can feel that in how flimsy Mark's reasoning is for blowing off his arrangement with Cecil and going to another galaxy with an alien he met the same night. Mark's choice here is easily the most contrived thing about this season. Nualzot claims that rumors of Invincible have spread like wildfire, such that they've reached multiple galaxies away from Earth in the span of a few months, but Mark should know better than to accept that. William convinces him to go with, thereby missing out on his college courses and sacrificing weeks with his loved ones, by appealing to what happened to Rick last season. That was a totally different situation. William using Mark's dismissal of Rick's disappearance to encourage him to help an alien stranger is not only desperate from the writers, but makes William out to be shallow and resentful, guilt-tripping Mark for a mistake he made, which he has long since apologized for, and which the GDA and Donald have gone to great lengths to ameliorate. While Amber was greatly improved this season, William is still a feckless prick. At this point, I really don't know how he's friend potential. All he does is bitch about Mark needing to grow up and being a bad friend, while the most he's brought to the table is fucking lasagna. It's probably floppy and flavorless just like he is.
Seance, dog? Really? What are we, 12?
And where do I even start with Shapesmith and the Sequids? I really preferred when Rex was the most annoying character in the show, because at least he didn't make me wanna... What made the folks behind the scenes think that writing Shapesmith to be so goofy and immature was a good idea? He is a confusing and cartoonish anomaly in the cast and among his entire race. All the other Martians we've seen are dignified and well-adjusted, and the worst part is that they couldn't even write him to be funny. If you're going to introduce a clown character, you do well to make his jokes land, but Shapesmith feels every kind of awkward. On top of the fact that he's responsible for an alien uprising that threatened all of Mars and Earth because he was bored.
For the truth may be more than you can handle.
We know you're a Martian. What, you think we'd let you join the team without figuring that out? What we don't know is how you got to Earth and why you're here.
I don't buy it. The GDA is not that stupid. Martians have shapeshifting capabilities, and now, after the first manned mission to Mars ended early because of complications with the locals, and after one of the astronauts on that mission was given a leave of absence for strange behavior, they let an unknown Martian become a guardian of the globe. Whichever way you slice it, the humans who learned the truth about how Shapesmith got to Earth were unfathomably lenient on him, during the reveal and after. Considering he bludgeoned an astronaut unconscious on a planet whose air he can't breathe, inciting a Sequid incursion to Earth and permanently compromising humanity's relationship with the Martians. And then, instead of briefing the Guardians on the Martian vessel's weaponry ahead of time, on Earth, like a well-coordinated team would, Shapesmith conveniently waits until they're in blasting range of the alien cruiser to divulge his knowledge of the Martian military. And even then, he's hesitant to do so. I don't know who I'm more pissed at, Cecil or Immortal, because they're both the exact types of characters to cover all their bases before initiating such a dangerous mission in space.
They'll know the difference between space garbage and whatever we are.
You're telling us this now?
Yes, I'm telling you this now.
After neutralizing almost all the Sequids in space, returning to Earth, and going through whatever insane rehabilitation procedures the Pentagon deems necessary, my dude Livingston is still carrying a facehugger in his gut. There's no way he would have been allowed back into the civilian population without thorough examination and a good few weeks of quarantine just to be safe. We are dealing with so many layers of monkey business here.
Well, don't you think that's kind of lazy?
Eve is insanely overpowered, and it's annoying that the show keeps ignoring that fact. The Adam Eve special gave us a look at her early life and the most detail about how her powers operate. The crazy scientist who created her claims, owed to a neural block he put in place, that she can't alter the chemical composition of people or animals. This is weird because it implies that she can only mess with inorganic material, which we see her doing all the time, but it leaves open the option for her to alter food. We see Eve grow vineyards unnaturally quickly, turn an apple to gold, and materialize alcohol for her guests. So that kind of organic material is open for chemical rearranging. And yet, in the same special, we also saw her unlock her full potential and alter the brains of her enemies, erasing their memories of her entirely.
I am Samantha Eve Wilkins, and I defy you to even remember who I am!
All of this points to the idea that Eve can, in fact, change anything into anything. After all, a neural block, to her, is as good as an umbrella is to a child living in Yemen. The universe is her sandbox, and we are all toy soldiers in it. But while she has the potential to do anything, it seems that she might not even have been aware of what she was doing at the time of the mind wipe, and it is plausible that she doesn't remember it. But that's as charitable as I'm willing to be. We've seen too many examples of Eve falling short when she could easily change supervillains' weapons to dust or save people by turning the air around them into pillows. Eve, at full power, is not just a godlike being, she's a plot hole factory. It boggles the mind to think that there wasn't a single dimension out there in which Eve witnessed Invincible and Omni-Man betray humanity and slaughter millions and unlock her full potential again. The first time was caused by a moment of extreme distress, but she, conveniently, seems to have forgotten that she's capable of spontaneous molecular disassembly. Season 1 Robot was an incredibly intriguing character, someone conniving enough to break the Maulers out of super prison only to use them for his own ends and turn on them, but also empathetic enough to identify with and try to remedy the unique struggle he and Monster Girl share. The problem is, in the act of trying to get closer to her, he orchestrated a massive jailbreak, injuring a guard and destroying GDA property, and stole his teammates' DNA to make a new body for himself. That's not something the other heroes around him would just brush off, but besides a rather oversimplified rant from Bulletproof in one episode, his crimes, rather conveniently, don't get any lip service. And that's a real shame, because further exploring Rudy's character by having him take accountability for how he achieved this new life of his could have been a fascinating subplot, and is further evidence that Season 2 is spread too thin. I appreciate the fact that we keep getting reminded of how serious Monster Girl's condition is, but I'm annoyed that nothing has come of it yet. Despite her appearance, she is actually a 27-year-old woman named Amanda, and it's a curse that turns the clock a week back every time she takes on her monstrous form. Her power should have noticeable effects on her and her team dynamic, but we just don't see them. Rudy is working on a cure for her, and she has a mixed reaction to how he goes about this process, but let's be clear. Season 1 and 2 take place over roughly 1 year. Just less than a year, I think, but the numerous month-long time jumps mean we're working within that time frame. We're told that since joining the Guardians, these characters' training intensity and frequency all increased. Dramatically so. Amanda did object to Robot on the basis of her curse before, but now Immortal doesn't seem to care, and she's no longer kicking up a fuss. Throughout both seasons, you can see her transforming frivolously, for weak reasons or for no reason. What I'm getting at is that we're told more about how rapidly she's de-aging than we're ever shown. If Season 3 doesn't deliver some actual consequences for the curse, remember, that's what it is, a curse, then all of her whining and warning other characters will have turned out to be pointless. Angstrom Levy was set up from episode 1 to be this season's big bad, and he does disappoint. Where do I even begin with this guy? He's a multiverse walker. He has access to limitless other dimensions, where the cure for cancer exists. The Viltrumites already have that, by the way. And where there's no world hunger. The Viltrumites have that covered too. Dimensions whose resources he seeks to use to improve his own. That's not a bad concept. Instead of going on a demented power trip and focusing all of his attention on the main character for no good reason, Angstrom aims to use his power to acquire knowledge and help those in need. Until that turns into him going on a demented power trip and focusing all of his attention on the main character for no good reason. Okay, saying no good reason is slight hyperbole, but only slightly. For all his experience across the multiverse, Angstrom is quite a doorknob. He recruits the Mauler twins for their expertise with the somatic encoder, aka the Christmas tree innator, which makes enough sense, but their assistance won't change how terrible of an idea it is to harness the memories of hundreds of other Angstroms in order to create a single repository of multiversal knowledge. The Maulers are aware of the kind of strain that would put on a human brain, but only object right before the procedure begins. Angstrom has no clue what he's getting himself into. The knowledge and experiences of 1,000 minds put into the brain of a single man. What happened to all that talk about neuron density and we've never done this before from the first season? Why are the Maulers so nonchalant about a machine they know could obliterate them? This is what begins the unfortunate trend of characters making stupid decisions in order to keep the plot moving. A trend that was, for the most part, absent from Season 1. The Maulers claim that once they begin the transferal process, it's impossible to stop. Just before this, however, Mark conveniently decided he was willing to play ball with Cecil, meaning that he could be there to see Angstrom in person, which conveniently set up for his appeal to Angstrom's good nature in the final episode. If Mark wasn't ready at this moment to take orders from Cecil, then the Guardians would have handled the mission instead, and he would have had no idea who this bloated bum threatening his family was, which would have made the situation play out very differently. Anyway, he bursts in and tells the Maulers to shut it down, and they reply with, "Make us," accomplishing nothing but inviting more problems. Why not explain the situation to Mark right then and there, instead of escalating? Angstrom tells him to stop fighting and listen to him, but doesn't actually use his words to explain anything. He just summons more Maulers to fight Mark, sending the exact opposite message.
I won't build my utopia with blood.
Then why did you teleport more Maulers in instead of actually communicating with Mark? Angstrom is a dunce for myriad reasons, but the explosion is squarely the Maulers' fault. When they said it would be impossible to stop once it started, they apparently actually meant that it is possible, just catastrophically dangerous. Not only does this blow up in all their faces, but it is the foundation of this season's climactic fight, and it makes no sense. Why, with access to the infinite multiverse, would the Mauler twins be best suited to this job? Obviously they're not, but they are cool characters and we'll take any reason to have them on screen, so it's basically a matter of convenience. But the fact remains that Angstrom could have found better droogs to meet his ends. Why are none of them worried about the loss of identity that comes with combining so many disparate minds into a single vessel? We're shown one story-relevant example of this, in that Angstrom is no longer able to parse the different experiences all of his different selves have had, and so develops a giga-grudge against Invincible for his roles in most dimensions' enslavement. What this would more plausibly result in is Angstrom being trapped in a living hell of his own design as he has lost the ability to distinguish between smells, memories, interactions, lessons, and basic metaphysical laws of each dimension he's experienced. This issue is raised by one of the Maulers, but it's not nearly fleshed out enough. Kinda like that Mauler. Remember, some dimensions differ only slightly, while others have completely different time streams and periodic tables. Some of those angstroms wouldn't have the same concepts of basic human norms we take for granted, and yet, among 1,000 unique dimensions, the most salient thought in all of those angstroms' heads is the trauma that Invincible and Omni-Man did to them. That's a powerful catalyst for our villain's revenge plot, but it is, all the same, facilitated by flimsy writing. And we're not even done yet. Why would Angstrom travel the multiverse employing the best doctors in order to enhance his physical capabilities after having undergone the trans-dimensional brain blender? I know it's because he wanted to beat the crap out of Invincible himself, but for all his grand scheming, it really seems he was putting the cart before the horse on this one. And strangest of all is the tonal whiplash the scene hits us with. We go from Debbie and Oliver crying in fear and pain, to Posh talking dinosaurs, to Mark trying to appeal to Angstrom's better nature, to a Spider-Verse cameo, to a harrowing montage of the atrocities Angstrom remembers enduring in other dimensions, to Mark hitting him with a victory royale. I don't understand, show. Do you want me to empathize with the villain's legitimately horrible past, or do you want me to appreciate that you included all these multiversal shenanigans? Why won't you let me feel extreme dread without undermining it with goofy references?
You did this! I was gonna save the world!
No one's eating me!
Oh, egads, it speaks!
You're not a killer. I'm sorry. I didn't remember you. Maybe the accident changed you, but you are a good person trying to do a good thing.
Ugh. Look, I saw the portal. I know you're from another dimension. Got way too much experience with that, especially lately.
I'll kill the boy quickly.
No! He deserves to die right now!
As a lifelong fan of the Spectacular Spider-Man, it was great hearing Josh Keaton make this cameo, even though I was hoping he would get to be an actual character in the rest of the season. Look, Rob, you don't get points just for having Josh Keaton present, especially considering the vibe of the situation surrounding this. But you do get points for having him point out how saturated the market is with Spider-Verse content. This show is, in this moment, guilty of the very thing he's joking about, but honestly that's the least of this season's problems. It's not that this scene isn't powerful or funny, it's both. The problem is that it won't let us soak in either emotion for longer than a minute without switching gears. The final episode of Season 1 had no problem drowning us in heartache and calamity, and it will stand the test of time for it. Whereas, this episode will be remembered for making it canon that Mark was in Fortnite. Beyond that, there are lots of silly little details that don't fit anywhere else, so I'm going to dump them all here. Angstrom blocked all communications around the Grayson household, but that doesn't explain why the GDA didn't show up sooner. They should have known something was up when they got no audio. Remember, basic surveillance for the GDA is that Patriot Act supercomputer from the Dark Knight. It's nice that the writers tried to justify the GDA's lack of awareness of what was going on, but I don't buy it, especially after everything that had preceded it. In earlier episodes, we get the impression that Cecil has a beat on Mark 24/7, owed to the earpiece he wears. This meant that when Mark went into Nightboy's dark dimension, Cecil lost Mark's signal, which is, obviously, a red flag for the GDA. Therefore, throughout his whole fight with Angstrom, Mark's signal would have been popping in and out of this universe at an alarming rate. And if that, conveniently, didn't prompt agents to investigate, then the fact that Mark's signal fell off the face of the earth as soon as he walked through his own front door, because Angstrom was jamming it, would have. Cecil and the GDA need to be written as uncharacteristically negligent for any of this to play out. Viltrumite rules on interbreeding make an exception for genetically similar species, like humans. But how are they at all genetically similar besides in appearance? Evidently, Viltrumites and Thraxans are genetically similar enough to produce healthy offspring. which feels like a plot hole all on its own. Surely Oliver would have a bone marrow deficiency or something.
You should have died at birth.
Episode 1 tells us that Mark is ready to get back to work, under Cecil's guidance, but that Cecil believes he's not ready. I know it's been a month since the events of Season 1, but the last we saw, Cecil was telling Mark that the GDA could really use his help, while Mark asserted that he needed time off. At the end of the day, this is a nitpick, but it's still a clear misalignment in messaging.
Stop it! I'm stronger and faster than you, and you know it!
Don't fail.
Immortal and Invincible had one scene of tension before this. Now, they butt heads for all of 2 seconds and then go right back to cooperating. While this interaction does contribute to Immortal's overall burnout, it could have been more significant to their relationship if they had even one more scene to talk things out. This is a nitpick, but that doesn't mean it isn't wasted potential. How did Livingston survive for all that time on Mars and in the Martian ship? Martians don't have the same atmosphere as us, and, even stranger, while the Martians breathe just fine on their military cruiser, so do the humans who absolutely shouldn't be able to. But then, inside their fighter jets, they wear helmets to breathe. This means that they have a better chance of surviving the vacuum of space after Invincible continues inflaming interplanetary tensions between us, but it raises the question, why have ships stocked with air to accommodate humans?
Sequids don't sleep. They never let me sleep.
For months? I can't stay up for more than 2 days without feeling like I'm dating Amber. This is not a nitpick. We need air to breathe and sleep to stay alive, and if Livingston didn't have either, then the Sequid invasion subplot, much like the astronaut himself, would have been dead on arrival. The entire Lizard League subplot is highly chaotic, and I frankly don't know how to address it. What I'd like to bring your attention to, principally, is either how bad the prisons in this world are, or how good the villains are at escaping. It goes both ways. At this point, Kill Cannon, or as I like to call him, Kill Cameo, is more meme than character. He was Mark and Eve's first supervillain bust. He can't put up a fight to save his life, but he keeps coming back. And now that the Lizard League have been properly introduced, they have the same problem. In episode 2, we see the Guardians take them on, and it's implied they won that fight, but in the League's next scene, they're back at their HQ planning their comeback tour. Which was a smash hit, I hear. A real mind-blower.
None of them should have survived this.
The thing is, the League wouldn't have been in the position to do that much damage to the Guardians if the Guardians and the GDA had done their job in securing these supervillains in the first place. I love recurring villains as much as the next guy, but at least have the courtesy to make us believe they're actually people inhabiting a world where crimes have consequences instead of Sisyphean jobbers whose only role is to lose every fight. Duplicate's death felt equally as shocking as it was sad. Until a single scene undid it. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a Cecil bot, like Donald and Rick, but that makes it kind of worse. If Cecil could have revived Donald and Kate by turning them into robots, then why not all the Guardians? Death had weight in Season 1. Now I'm not sure what to think anymore. According to outdated Atlantean custom, Nolan was to marry Aquarius's widow, but now the sentence falls to Mark. The Atlanteans threatened to wipe out the eastern seaboard if the sentence was not carried out, but didn't inform Cecil that the sentence was changed to trial by combat, and he, conveniently, didn't think to clarify, unwittingly sending Mark into a death match. A staggering lapse in communication which ended up getting people killed.
This wasn't the deal.
As though the Atlanteans misled or lied to him. Cecil, why didn't you ask what the sentence was? I'm pretty sure warrior cultures get touchy when you make those kind of assumptions about them. Also, how are they communicating with each other right now? Sound doesn't propagate like that.
You will address her as your majesty, air breather.
Right, your majesty. You are gay.
How did Anissa find Mark?
You probably should ignore that.
Alan only visited Earth once before, but still needed Mark to point out where he lived. Anissa seemed to have no problem locating him, and no one acknowledges that. The Viltrumites could have put some kind of tracker on or inside of him back on Thraxa, but at that point I'm just doing the writing for the writers. And, on a personal note, this season did not have enough Omni-Man. He was easily the most compelling character of the first season, and his absence here is felt. In his place, we got a bungling maniac whose entire role in the narrative relies on miscommunication and shoddy writing, a group of jobbers no one takes seriously who only did as much damage as they did by sheer luck, because the heavy hitters were, conveniently, in space, a hive mind of alien parasites who've only been allowed to get this far because the characters we thought were the most adept at risk management repeatedly dropped the ball, and a collection of jetpacking space racists who bark more than they bite. Seriously though, how do they end up exactly where the plot needs them to be when it needs them to be there? If my criticism of Invincible Season 2 could be neatly summed up, The pacing is worse, the number and frequency of contrivances and conveniences has drastically increased, and the writers are slowly but surely losing their grip on the reins of this world's internal consistency. By allowing villains like Kill Cannon and the Lizard League to roam free mere hours after being defeated, and by stupefying the most competent and capable characters in order to artificially raise the stakes. What was shoehorned into these 8 episodes needed at least 10 to be done justice. Roughly 2 more hours would have gone a long way in bolstering all the rushed and underdeveloped aspects of what we got. Namely, Mark's reasoning for going to Thraxa, and Immortal's relationship with Kate and ensuing grief over her death. Other character dynamics, however, are impressively explored, and the story's most impactful moments boast the appropriate emotional weight. Invincible Season 2 is an entertaining and emotionally gripping narrative, a worthwhile continuation of a fascinating and inspirational hero's journey, even if lacking the coherence of what came before. In truth, the worst thing about Season 2 is that it's not as good as the first, and yet, for all the lazy writing, it stayed true to Invincible's spirit, engrossing us in a fantastical and dangerous world, giving side characters real depth and purpose, and centering all of it on the story of a kid just doing his best. But seriously, give us more than 8 episodes next season, you cowards.